So tell me a little bit about this group, Art Mantram. Who, what, is it spread all over? What's it like?
Yumna, you tell.
Yeah.
It's started by, you need to tell him something about your mom.
Okay, so mom is a police officer. She was the third policewoman to join the service in the country, the first in South India.
Can I just interject there? So her mother, J Harisingh, was from the IPS Kerala cadre, who came to Karnataka and became the Inspector General of Police of Karnataka. She is a legend, not just in Karnataka, but across the country. And I'm going to say it better than Yumna. And she's so multifaceted and has got so much joie de vivre for life. She's just an extraordinary woman. And Yumna and her mother have the most beautiful relationship I've seen a mother and daughter have. They're so synchronized and so synergized on the vision of all the things that they can do with art. And Ada's profile, Siddharth.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, all the amazing work she did. But I remember that during COVID, that's when we had the first edition of the Glasshouse Festival, Global Festival of Poetry. There was an admirable representation of poets from across the world. And Yumna was almost single-handedly talking to almost most of them. It was, I've not seen anybody else do what she did at that point, syncing with each one of them, directing the right conversations with them to very, very powerful outcomes. She was extraordinary. Then after that, she went into bed and pulled up a blanket. It did not appear for the next 6 months. That's another story.
Sounds incredible.
Yeah, she's incredible. She's incredible, which is why I'm excited that both of you will be talking to each other.
Thank you. I'm everything about mom underplays how amazing she is, and everything said about me overplays my role. Okay, but I think I would like to start because it's 8:32 and we like to start on time. And whoever is coming in late can just come in late, I think. We are thrilled to have you with us. Everybody, I'm sure you've read a little bit about Siddharth. Some of you have gone out and bought his books. I'm very pleased to see that because he does amazing writing. We're honored to have him with us this evening. And you may already know, I'm just going to start with a little introduction before we jump into conversation. It's going to be the way it usually is. We'll be starting off at 8:30. We'll go to 9:30. And about 35 to 45 minutes of conversation. And hopefully, Siddharth will share his work with us and do a couple of readings. And then we'll open the floor to questions. And I'm sure that you are going to, as usual, have fantastic questions that we'll all benefit from hearing Siddharth's perspective and also hearing your brief introduction about Siddharth for those of you who haven't had a chance to catch up on who Siddharth is. Siddharth, his literary journey has been nothing short of remarkable. Rukmini touched on what a talented writer he is. The release of his fourth book, A Movable East, in early 2021 was followed by his fifth book and third collection of poetry, All These Streets We've Known by Heart, which came out in, I think, October 2022 via Red River. And his work has been in publications such as Prairie Schooner, Prairie Fire, Cordite, Epiphany, Rogue Agent Thimble, Kyoto Journal, and many more. And not only is Siddharth a poetry and prose, but he's also editor of visual narratives with the Bombay Literary magazine. And for those of you who've read his work and for those who will hear his work come alive now, you'll realize he's somebody who calls many places home. and represents all of these vibrant cities in his work. He lives in Pune, but has cafes popping up literally globally in the work that he's put together. And I'm sure we'll share this at the end as well, but you can follow him on Instagram at Citizen Bliss. So, Siddharth, great to have you with us. So thrilled that you're here with us this evening.
Yumna, it's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. Acha, listen, I just wanted to start off by talking about what has always spoken to me about your work, which is, you know, these the way you sort of leaven that with nostalgia, how you you move with such elan, you know, between these worlds of jazz and Hindi cinema. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, you know, these themes. Do you find that you have had multiple collections of poetry come out? Do you find that the works organize themselves around theme, or is there just sort of this this current of thought that works through all of your work, and it's not really by collection per se?
If I were to talk about poetry collections, you know, you never start off saying I'm writing a collection. You know, you write a poem, someday you write another poem, things start to gather, and then if things have worked out well, you start to recognize something resembling a theme or something resembling a strand or a current, which could sort of all weave together. And when that happens, that's a remarkable thing, because it gives the previously written poems a home in your mind, but it also, you know, sort of gives you impetus for the poems to come, that there is a sort of spiritual and intellectual address that these poems are belonging to. So, I mean, the starting point, though, is no agenda, you know. The starting point is the words. Let's see what one word leads to, you know, what does one poem lead to? And then sort of allowing that to create its own roadmap. And further down the line, taking a call, you know, taking a call as a writer to see whether whether this resembles a collection in a matter of speaking.
So how do you, you know, I touched on it a little bit. Like I loved so many of your poems, the references that you make to, you know, do you mind if I just jump ahead quickly and talk a little bit about, I see God in the strangest places,
Yeah,
which is one of the poems. And you talk about finding God in bakeries, and you talk about finding God, you know, in the intersection of a tree and a fallen pole, and how you don't find God in the temple within the stained glass stillness of a rousing mosque, or within the antiquated romance of a Sunday mass. You see beauty here, perfectly portioned, faithfully rationed, but I don't see God. So I wanted to just come back and quickly talk to you a little bit about, you know, how do you choose subjects, and what are these ideas? Is it something that just sort of comes to you in the moment, or is it something that you, because I feel like your poems are very well crafted, but the origin of the poem, when you sit down to write, is it something that is spontaneous, or is it something that you sit down with an idea in mind that you then develop?
you know, you're not often it's quite immediate, and often it's quite sudden, unexpected, and off the moment. At times there are, you know, poems that are based on memory of a certain episode from the past, and then they have, you know, they've been given that time to sort of linger, simmer, and then I have the time to sort of craft and recraft and all of that. But many of the time they're immediate. There's a certain immediacy to them. Poetry allows for that, and there's also joy in the crafting of it, because you might go back, you know, you might go through a draft, you might go through another draft, but it's at its most intense in its rawest form. So I tend to leave many of the poems as they appeared, you know, with very minor sort of interference, because writers tend to get very finicky. So I like to sort of see if the poetry can retain that sort of raw urgency and that very, very appreciable immediacy to which kind of gave birth to the poem to begin with.
Acha, on that note, can you share a particular poem or a piece of prose that you hold dear and tell us the story behind it?
Sure. I think it might be good to read from the most recent of the collections. All These Streets We've Known by Heart, which came out sometime last year. And I'm going to read a small piece. This is called Prayers for the Dreamer. I'm just going to read a stanza or two. From the seasoned fangs of an ash-blue metropolis, every nebula is a faint mythical hum, like the exhalation of a forest, the chimera of a lover, or the pages of a poet. The tobacco shop around the corner sells single cigarettes and a few magazines from 1988. I wonder about the amnesia of time, how any year is nothing more than what remains remembered. In the city, the sirens are dying down and we're beginning to dream again. In the city, love is seasonal, much like the pangs of hapless calves, the migration of northern mulberries. A night of beautiful radio, songs plucking at the lure of my glorified skin. Lover eye reaches for the words that have taken the shape of wombs, given how every city is what remains after the forgetting. That was a tiny bit.
It's lovely. Actually, I also wanted to touch on talking about the same. Thank you for sharing that work with me.
Yeah.
You reference so many locations, so many places in your work, and how. I mean, I guess the works and the spaces inspire your writing, but is that also a deliberate choice, or is that something that you found your writing just sort of referring to places and bringing them alive as a way of almost memorializing or capturing moments? Is that where it came from, or is it more deliberate than that as well?
I mean, I've often been told that both in my fiction as well as in my poetry, city and place almost becomes character. And I think if I were to sort of talk very briefly about some of the themes that have proven to be recurring themes in much of my writing, you look at desire, you look at nostalgia, you look at the act of holding on, you look at childhood. City is central to all of them, and then city almost becomes inevitable. Sometimes, of course, it's very, very, it's very direct. Like there's some cities that are born out of Paris or Istanbul or Pune, and they belong to that city, and it's the city that has birthed the poem, and then it's a very, very strong, potent connection. Sometimes the city is at the periphery of things. At other times, the city sort of comes in like a wayward, sort of drunkard character, I don't try and plot things out too much, because then I think I lose that sense of immediacy and that sense of urgency and that sense of poetic potency. But I mean, the city has turned out to be the city, this great anonymous creature has turned out to be a really, really strong part of my writing.
Yeah. Building on themes and influences and characters almost in your writing, I would say, there are these cultural links. For example, the theme of Hindi cinema. You talk about Dilip Saab, and you talk about Saira Banu, and not just, I'd say, Hindi cinema, but also great singers, Nina Simone, you Bridget Bardot, you reach out, and your poetry sort of encompasses this cultural milieu, you know, that seems like your background and heritage sort of all coming together. Could you talk a little bit about how you'd say your cultural background and heritage influence your writing, and how, in what ways you look at incorporating these elements into your work?
Um, well, I can start from home, because I think that's a pretty fine place to start. Um, so my father is the most voracious reader I know. My earliest memories of childhood are sort of seeing him surrounded by stacks of books, and that informed much of what I thought a good life could be. Like if you were surrounded by words, you know you'd be quite happy. Um, and then words naturally leading to a wider sense of the world around me. Cinema, travel, movement, all of that. My mom, on the other hand, has been pretty much the most sort of adventurous person I know. She's traveled to sort of amazing places and cities, including Tehran and Iran, and um, uh, from Azerbaijan to sort of places that people won't even think of venturing to. And she started doing all this at a very early stage, and her stories of life in other lands, and her sort of the way she approaches life have also been real sort of teaching points, and that has led to this very natural fondness and attraction towards cinema, towards poetry and books from another land, from different lands, philosophies, histories, geographies, uh, and culturally, the sense that, I mean, given the fact that I'm not religious at all, but the fact that different religious customs hold these different cultural sort of, aspects and beauty to them. I think all of that has proven to sort of kind of uh, inevitably find its way into my writing. I don't think much of it is forced, because when you look at Hindi cinema and when you look at old Hindi film songs, I think for a certain vintage of Indian childhood, that's such an integral part, right? And so then when it comes to poetry, it seems uh, it seems almost daft that I would not, you know, find some way of gathering, old Hindi film songs occasionally within the poetry, and so on and so forth. Brigitte Bardot, the French New Wave was such an influence. The Italian New Wave was such an influence. Satyajit Ray, Tagore, all of that, and then you see how sometimes it just finds its way into a piece of writing, and at other times you think maybe this piece of writing could do with a bit of Sarah Banu, and then Sarah Banu comes in. So it's different things at different times.
Fabulous. Could I, on that note, ask you to read something else for us?
Sure. Let me try and find the Sarah Banu piece, in fact, because I think that might be appropriate. Let's see, where are we?
Is that the one with the Sarah Banu skies?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
one.
beautiful. And Dilip Saab.
And the Lipsa. I think the two go hand in hand. Right. I'll read a little bit. And also, as much as this is a love letter to Sarah Banu and a love letter to Dilip Saab, this is also a love letter to a hometown, Pune. And it begins as such, an accidental lover. In Pune, the skies are always filled with a Sarah Banu-like delicateness. And no, I haven't sipped a drop of wine this evening. A song prances in the air, the need, the admission that I will be in your debt, left suspended in the words, for the past too is often in the need of forgiveness. On Parade Ground Road, the half-wit is screaming about a kite he lost in childhood. We've all lost our share of kites. Just some of us have stopped have stopped staring at the sky. That's just a teaser.
It's lovely. It's lovely. I love that poem.
Thank you.
Okay. So, your audience is basically also working poets.
Yeah.
Myself of middling ability, but I wanted you to share a little bit about your creative process while writing poetry and fiction. Do you have any specific rituals or
Yeah.
routines that help you in the writing zone? How do you structure your writing to get it on the page?
I'll speak maybe on 2-3 things, and this will give you some idea of the process as such. I always have a journal and a pen with me wherever I am, especially when I'm out and about traveling, because I'd like to jot down things. It could be a phrase, it could be a piece of conversation, it could be a really lovely word somebody has mentioned, and it's a word that I'd like to stick and I'd like to use at some point. So that's with regards to holding on and documenting and archiving. Um, with regards to a very, very specific process, I love to write early in the mornings. So sort of 5 to 8, or say 5:30 to 9:30 is my golden hour. And if I can write during that time, and it usually tends to be very fruitful. Um, and the third aspect I can perhaps talk to you about is the fact that often you find that you can't write, and the words aren't flowing. And in those occasions, I like to just leave things be. I don't like to force it. I like to step away from it, maybe head out for some chai, read some poetry, watch a film, and then maybe come back to it after a while, giving it some space and time, and see uh, whether there's some magic that's been picked up. So these are a sort of a few things that I like to do in terms of craft, and in terms of actual craft, especially when it comes to poetry. Um, I found that the first and the second editing rounds are as fruitful as the writing of the poem itself, because it tends to reveal your poetry in new light, and often the culling or adding or addition, deletion, finessing sort of takes the poetry in new directions, and often you're like left saying, "Wow, I'm glad that happened." So I think the editing and the drafting process is not to be run away from. It's a hugely fruitful, enjoyable process. I've found in my writing.
Can I just ask another question to follow on that
Yeah.
about form? When you're stuck, do you find that it actually helps to work with a strict structure? Does that help also to explore new ways of thinking? Sometimes I find that when I'm stuck, looking at new forms and trying to just as an exercise, sort of helps me break through blocks. And I was looking at your new collection and the number of different forms that you have in there. Is that something that you work on deliberately? Is that something that just comes depending on how the poem flows? What are your thoughts on form?
I love a sense of randomness. So for me, if I can start from a point of randomness, that to me is crucial. Often I might finesse it, after there's this sort of mad mess of things on the page. I might try and finesse it to a given form. Like, for instance, in All These Streets We've Known by Heart, you might have noticed that a sort of style, a poetry style that has repeated itself is the golden shovel, which is you take a piece of writing and and that each word from, say, a given sentence or a given stanza forms the last word in what you're writing, in your stanza structure. So that's sometimes it's very enjoyable and very interesting to do that. But I like to start from a point of randomness. And at times it'll get finessed to something more structured and more classical. But this sense of playfulness and freedom that exists in postmodern poetry, allows you to kind of swim with it and see where it goes.
Can I make a request of what you read next?
Yeah, please.
Can you read Encomium?
Yeah. That's good because, that's the golden shovel that I was referring to. It's an example of that. Encomium is after a piece of writing by Raymond Carver. And I'll read some of the poem and then I'll read what the stanza would have, the stanza I've taken from. So let's see, I think Encomium is in the beginning somewhere. Yeah. Encomium after Raymond Carver. How to tell you that it was a remarkable day. I woke, poured myself some coffee, and rustled up an elegant omelette, perfectly fluffed this way and that. The city shimmered in morning light, lampposts still in sadnesses, papers damp with a touch of neglect. In its entirely ordinary way, a day entirely ordinary. And yet, terrific. This awareness of human life and vinyl, this urge to throw on some Dizzy and some Shankar, to wallow in the crumpled nonchalance of sheets. Lie for a while, breathe. Maybe the best days in retrospect are an abandonment of special. Bed, brew, kiss, clouds, an overcast sky. That's all it is. Stripped of artifice and splendor, a day. I'd like to tell you of perfect magnolias and such, but that would be a lie. I siphon, I read the best poems, and draw myself in them. A fought wind, buying to my simple apartment. Against sermons and floods and wars and faith, it was a remarkable day. In time, it'll make for fairy tale like confession. This man, a narrative, a lifetime, a minute. Now, if I were to read the last word from each line, this would form, woke up this morning with a terrific urge to lie in bed all day and read, fought against it for a minute. That, is what Raymond Carver wrote.
Fantastic. All right. So now I just wanted to talk to you also about your work as an editor. Now you work as an editor. And how do you find that this role as editor influences your writing? Is there an influence at all? Or are they two separate worlds that don't impinge on each other?
They tend to be two separate worlds, but also, when you read others' writing, and you're reading it from a very, very editorial point of view, you're reminded of faults, you're reminded of strengths, you're reminded of the manner in which writing can flourish, you're reminded in which the manners in which, writing can stumble at times. And then it's always learning, there's always something to pick up on which you've not picked up on earlier. So it's a wonderful thing, and it also introduces you to just some mental space that others are occupying when it comes to their writing. So not a very direct influence. They tend to be different worlds, but also I think two worlds entirely conjoined, and two worlds that kind of tend to feed off each other.
All right, I shall now allow you to pick what you read next.
Okay, let me read something from the collection that came before All These Streets, which was A Movable East. And I'll read a tiny poem called Madras Cafe, because I think this talks about cafe, this talks about chai, but this also talks about appams, and this also talks about the act of mm, paying attention to things, I suppose, more than anything. You don't sip the convulsions of coconut milk, you slurp. This is noisy, earthy homage, both hands cupped fervently around the wet rims of a ceramic bowl, breath to heat, tongue to spice, the shy elegance of appams, cradling tradition like a child, circling the verdures in meditative days, imbibing every last drop of this land's fertile moon, meeting the mouth like a lover through thoroughly slaked, bringing denouement to the shadows of this undeniably Indian dance. I think I skipped a couple of stanzas, but I just wanted to bring up Madras Cafe.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. I don't know if you can see everybody, but you're getting little hand claps.
No, I'm glad. I can just see the two of us.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, okay, I think we've gone for about half an hour, and I want to ensure that everybody else also gets their opportunity to ask questions of you. So I won't take too much longer. An open-ended question. Do you have any advice for emerging poets and writers looking for their, unique voice and style in the world of literature?
I think two, three universal sort of truths about literature that hold true. I mean, they're cliches, but I think they're cliches for a reason. One would be, read as much as you can, really. Read all the time. But also read stuff that you might not actually write, and stuff that you're never going to write. Like if you're a poet, occasionally read nonfiction, just because it teaches you about discipline and craft, and sort of sheds light on how the writer might be approaching things, and allows you to sort of view things from a distance, in terms of craft and appeal and storyline and structure and all of that. The other aspect I would sort of urge you to follow is not to believe friends and family when they tell you your writing is great. Try and bring others into the fold. Try and bring people who are who are writers, who are poets, who are sort of people you perhaps admire or read yourself. And the third aspect of it would be not to rush into getting published, because many great writers never got published at all. And many great writers got published after decades, So if you think you have a good piece of writing, maybe approach, and certainly don't try and publish a book, right at the onset. Publish stories or publish poetry, poems, and then see how editors are reacting to it. Then see how, they're speaking about your craft, what advice they're giving you, and try and form a legible body of work before you advance further.
Thank you, Siddharth. Before I open the floor to questions, I have one last question. Are there any sort of future projects or works that you're, I think you have a new collection coming out, if I'm not mistaken, that you'd like to give us a sneak peek into? Whether to just tell us about it or whether to share something from it, I leave it up to you.
Thanks, Yumna. I don't have a new collection coming out, in fact. I'm writing all the time, Poetry is a deluge. I mean, whether some days I wake up thinking, I will not write poetry today, enough, give it a break. And invariably, I'll end up writing. So poetry is a bit of a deluge. Fiction requires discipline, Fiction requires you to say, I'm sort of, cocooning myself within this space, and I'm giving it, this time and these few months, and seeing what it leads to. So there's a lot of writing at hand. I just need to see whether it forms a narrative, whether it forms anything resembling a collection. But the fact that, I get to write and it gets to mean something uh, is hugely fulfilling. So whether it leads to a collection or not, whether there's a book in the near future or not, I think we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, great. Everybody get your questions in order. You're soon going to be asked, the floor will be open and you can ask them of Siddharth. Siddharth, while they're getting their thoughts in order, would you like to share another with us?
Let me read last close movable list. It's an homage to childhood and the curious way which memories tend to sort of shape themselves. It's called Contrails, and I'll read certain passages from it. When I was a child, I thought the river Kaveri was a girl who could never find her way back home. I thought the Indus Valley was a gully filled with flowing rivulets of honey. I thought home was a place where mum, dad, and books, Raduga Publishers, Moscow, danced beneath the happy orange and lemon pink blaze of something that I would only later come to know as dusk. Games of cricket echoed to the protesting chirps of crickets, blossoms of evasive gulmohar, and sprigs of playful marigold cling to the earth like sandwiches for a weekend picnic, clinging to cellophane glaze. When I was a child, I never knew I'd use the word penumbra someday, but I knew the inner workings of humility. It lay in the shy elegance of our home, birthed through the whispered melange of bricks, soil, mud, and faith. I'm not sure how to put this, but childhood felt like ripples tossed out on a lake, each remembrance hinged to words that were never quite spoken. When I was a child, it seemed to me that the whole wide world could be contained deftly within the meanderings of a single poem.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I'm going
Yumna,
to
would you just allow me a second, please? I'd just like to go get some water. Till then, maybe you could gather the questions that have come in. I'll just run away briefly and get some water.
So while Siddharth's off getting water, would you like to post your questions in the chat, or should we just take them directly on?
What would you prefer?
I'm fine either way.
I think I would prefer just to ask.
Yeah, I think we can just go ahead and ask, no?
Yeah.
Because I think typing and then all of that is
Because this new format seems to be confusing for me, this Zoom thing. I think when I've updated it, it's now completely new. So, and being an expert, it's totally confusing.
okay. I hope you all have your questions in order.
No, I was thinking, I remember, since he's gone, I remember Rukmini telling me, that she dresses herself for something and waits for the poems to come, when I heard this morning wait, he says time 5 to 9, hi Siddharth, I'm Shaji.
Hello, Shaji.
Hi. I was wondering this timing that you said, this great time in the morning, because do you really give a time frame so that over the years, you've sort of trained your mind to accept poetry during that time? Because it doesn't work like that for me. Or is this something that you build up? Because for me, I find it difficult because I'm happily sleeping under the blanket, and then there is this line that has come, and I don't want to get up, but then I have to get out and then, pick up my phone and just voice tape or write.
I think it's whatever that works for you, really. In fact, I was telling Yumna that's my favorite time in which to write, you know, as in if if the writing flows, it tends to flow best at that hour for me. Uh, but also, you know, I'd find myself in a cafe with my trusty journal, and it could be some late hour, and you know, something will arise. But I think through trial and error, you need to find what works best for you. And I've simply found that what works best for me is early morning, because I like that sense of no distraction, you know, because the city has not yet awoken. You know, you're not yet deluged by the day, you know, to so to speak, and it's just you and the writing in a sense. So I enjoy that that sense of solitude and intimacy.
Okay, anybody who has questions, please feel free to unmute and ask them directly.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi. My name's Anil. I'm Vikram's dad. Vikram is the poet. I'm just his spokesperson. Vikram doesn't speak. He's an artistic individual. He's about 31 years old and started writing for the first time in his life about
Vikram.
4 years ago. So, Vikram, say hi to Siddharth. Right. So, Vikram's found his voice, so to speak, about 4 years ago. And he's been writing in verse. He expresses more in verse than otherwise. He's very poor on his operational communication for what he needs, etc. But he writes poems, and some of them we publish in this common group here. A question for you is: he's written about 40 odd poems so far, and they're pretty hard hitting. And coming from where he is, it's all accumulated in his head, and he pretty much spits it out in one go. It's not something that's curated over time. It's a one time effort that he just gets it out there. There are no edits, and he writes on an iPad or on a letterboard where he spells through typing on a letterboard. He doesn't speak yet. Um we'd like to get his work out there more from a point of self accomplishment, or something that he has to show his body of work, which is pretty much his way of how he's expressed himself on the planet. Um, what do you recommend as a journey for him? You mentioned about publishing one poem at a time and then get editors' feedback, etc., or just go gangbusters and go and publish a book. What's the best approach, and how do you get those single editors to comment on individual poems, if I may ask?
For Vikram, I'd love for you to, you know, send a few of the strongest poems to the editors of literary journals. There's now a very strong sort of culture of literary journals in India and everywhere around the world. And one really good thing about the literary journals here and everywhere else in the world is that they're very structured, you know, so that they have a period when they're open for submissions. They have a period when they're not accepting submissions. So it's a very, very clear-cut process. You know at what time you can send your poetry to. Some journals make it even more sort of streamlined because they'll offer a certain theme, you know, for an upcoming issue, and then
Right.
you know, you'll be able to tell if any of Vikram's poetry speaks to that theme. But uh, reach out to a handful of editors of different journals to begin with, and you know, I think baby steps, you know, is something that sort of makes sense, because one leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next, and as at a point in time, say if he's published 10 or 12 or 15 poems in journals, then you can start to consider that it might be time to gather these poems in a collection, you know, and then at that point in time, you can approach a publisher or the editor of a publishing
Mhm.
house. But start with journals. Start with
So,
journals.
do you recommend any journals in particular? Because we're fairly new to this whole thing.
Yeah. The journal I'm an editor with is excellent. The Bombay Literary Magazine is doing some good work, very strong work. There's a few other literary journals in India. There's one called Usava, you know, which is very good. There's the Yao Rok Literary Journal, which is very good. There's the Bangalore Poetry Review, if I've got that correct. That's very good. So a handful of journals, and I also know that the online magazines, like Scroll and the Hindu and Outlook, they publish poetry as well. So those are other great avenues to reach out to.
Okay, meaning is there, they're just Googleable, I'm assuming.
Sorry?
Are they just Googleable to find where exactly to write to? Because you seem to be like an
Absolutely.
ocean.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
My pleasure.
This is Kala here. Good
Hi,
evening.
Kala.
Hi. And I just wanted to know how you, I mean, what do you feel when another person edits your poem? You have worked on and edited yourself and you feel it's good enough. Do you give it to open to others to edit? And how do you feel about it?
It's strange, in fiction, with fiction, you're very open to the editorial process, because you know that, it needs to be finessed, it needs to be strengthened, it needs to be, perhaps rewritten at times, and that an objective eye really helps with that. In poetry, poets are strange creatures. Poetry, you're like, this is my writing, get out. But I think I think with time and age, I think I've become quite open to the fact that also I've learned to recognize when a piece of writing is really strong and really good and doesn't require editing. And then I'm able to have a conversation, with it, with the editor about it, saying, I really feel this poem is as good as it's going to get, and any work on it would be meddling, and I think it would reduce it to a weaker state. And you're also able to recognize when an editor is able to add something special to it, but I think that comes with time, I believe.
I can understand it's very difficult because it's your own work.
Yeah.
Devendra here. Just wanted to compliment you on the way you energize each of your line of your writing. You're flitting from here to there to there. And when I picked up the book Movable East, and the first chapter consists of, the first theme is about cafes. And I could be sitting across in the same cafe as you and looking at you, drinking in the aroma, the atmosphere, and also appreciating the food. You're flirting from, whether it's from Paris or from Istanbul or from Pune or from Bombay or from Delhi even. And I would rather name your book A Movable Feast instead of A Movable East.
Actually, the title, is a sort of homage to an actual book called A Movable Feast, which Hemingway wrote a few decades ago, many decades ago. And Ernest Hemingway, this A Movable Feast was a sort of memoir of his time in Paris. And Hemingway wrote about the fact that if you've had the good fortune to live in Paris as a young man, then wherever else you go in the world, you tend to carry Paris with you. So in that sense, it becomes this movable, transferable feast of sights and sounds and smells and aromas. And that's what I wanted this collection to be, So I thought A Movable East was a good sort of coinage for the collection, and also a good sort of little nod towards Hemingway as well.
That's lovely. And I loved one of your travelogues where you have covered up the wine country, and the way you appreciate it and written down, it's prose, but it comes across as poetry. Very lyrical writing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that greatly.
Thank you.
While everybody else gets their thoughts in order, can I make another request?
In fact, because you mentioned it, I'm sorry. It's your name is showing up as Bhatnagar. What is your name? Yeah,
You're on-
you've been what? He's on mute. What's his name?
Sorry, Devendra Bhatnagar.
Devendra. Devendra, since you mentioned, that specific poem, the prose poem, about. Let me read that. The two of them, I'll read the shorter one. This is called Wild Blush. Libations bloom italicized, each arched arc of typographic ruse rising to meet the loquaciousness of an unresolved mouth. The earth's moist mother tongues hiss beneath brevity of grapes, soil's syntax alive to the looming heartbeat of another vintage year. And the one you were speaking to is called, I think, A Latin Quarter Hunger. I'll read a couple of stanzas from that. From precisely 7 apartment blocks away, I've counted a gushing stream of aromas, recipes, ingredients, and legacies invokes Paris as an exodus of ephemeral perfection. Molten cheese invades thickly crusted bread. I relish. Infusing a sigh of orchards and farms, dappled with Roquefort, a carafe of wine quarters a poet's quenched confessions, a bundle of parchments for ink-dipped surrender. I nourish. Lazy flurry of words, confessions, prayers, and prose, as early morning drifts like myth, even while this narrative takes, then gives.
Wonderful, sir. Where's the French beret?
You'll have to imagine that.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for requesting it.
Siddharth, Rukmini here.
Hi, Rukmini.
Yours is a voice that transcends time and place. So my question to you is very simple. Who are you and how old are you? I know how old you are. I know your mom. But how old do you think you are and who are you? Where do these words, where do these thoughts, where do these experiences come from?
Thank you, Rukmini, for putting me in this spot. Who am I? I think I tend to think of myself as a seeker, as a traveler, as a lover, a writer, a dreamer, a son, a poet more than anything. And in terms of how old I am, at times I'm 10. I'm throwing tantrums. At times I'm my actual age, which is 41. At times, many people say I'm an old soul. So I think 70 you can go with. But I think it's safe to settle at a safe middle ground. So let's call it 30, just just to be safe.
Your poetry is unbelievable. There are few people that I've read who write like you. So that you're extraordinary. We're so grateful to have you here with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. That means a whole lot.
Do we have any more questions? Because if we don't, then we're going to take full advantage of having Siddharth here and have him read more for us. Kala, you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to know, do you read poetry in various other languages or only in English?
I read I read a lot of translated poetry. I tend to read a lot of poetry that has been translated from, say, the Arabic or Spanish, because so much great poetry coming out of there. So then, in a sense, it's this act of dancing with language, because you're reading someone's interpretation of what someone has written, and then Urdu is something beautiful to read. But even this act of reading translated poetry that has been translated into English is quite an interesting sort of landscape, because you're being introduced to new worlds of thought and new worlds of how poets go about phrasing the language. So it's a remarkably fulfilling sort of process.
But
can I ask a question? Oh, sorry, please.
But largely, your language is only English.
Largely,
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Rubhi, it's your voting. Devyani?
Yeah. So thanks a lot for sharing. That was really some wonderful poetry we listened to.
Thank you.
And I have two quick questions for you. Like you said, poetry, you go through like prose. We have a critique group here, actually, me and Shubhangi, who's not here, admins. So when we write prose, we go through many edits and we critique each other's work, and we are really ruthless, like what you said, don't ask your relatives, but maybe your friends, and they are also fellow writers. So we have improved a lot through that. Around 5 years, we've been critiquing each other's work. But what I want to know is whether poetry can be critiqued, because we did have a meetup here and we felt like poetry comes from the heart. So can it be critiqued? And the second question is related. Like you said, writing requires discipline, like sit yourself down for a few hours and have some morning pages or whatever. Like, so should you be doing that with poetry, or should you just leave it to feelings and emotions? Like, because on this group, we have the practice of writing for prompts. So is it a good thing to write for prompts, or you're forcing your poetry out of you, or just your views on both these points?
I'll start with the first point. Should poetry be critiqued? It absolutely should, because especially poetry, which often is so deeply personal and is so deeply looking inward. The great sort of danger with that is poetry, and you see that in a lot of Insta poets and a lot of poetry that is online. It becomes very self-indulgent, It becomes very, very self-indulgent. It also becomes sometimes trite. Sometimes it becomes too repetitive. So as with any writing, what an editor does is an editorial approach or a critiquing from, say, a group such as yours brings in a slightly detached point of view to that. And because it's detached, it's objective, So certainly it can help strengthen your poetry, because poetry can't just be about feelings and emotions. There also needs to be some sort of literary gravitas and profundity to it. The second aspect of it was, again, I'd like to repeat myself, early morning for me is a beautiful time in which to gather, I may write, I may not write. That's a different process. But I feel if you were to just leave it to emotion, then your writing might be very, very overly emotional writing, as opposed to the act of also allowing yourself to write at different times where maybe you're not led by emotion, and then writing tends to take on different guises and different interpretations. And but again, please find the time that you're comfortable with. A lot of days you could go without writing, and that's perfectly okay, but find the time and the place that tends to work best for you, I feel.
Thank you.
Yumna, I feel we're done. I feel.
Yes, it's 9:29, so we've got 1 minute to go. And I want to, before we end, I want to share. Can I read one of your works?
Yes, please. I'm doing enough reading.
So this is a drink with a friend,
Yes.
a brief burst of dark jazz. Sit. We'll share the communal denials of a drink. One after the other, we'll count your losses. They only seem much. A shot of coffee to swim in the whiskey, as here it stirs to providence and faith. If your mind's up to it, we'll try and work out the kinks to the world if we can. The sins of the saxophonist lie in wait. Wait till he pushes the note a while. It'll strike at the heart of things you're harboring, like the 26 times you let love walk away. And there's a reason the drummer stays still. He lies in wait for you to have a sip. You see, the act of jazz for some is regret. The act of jazz for some is life. Sip a lick, breath, slip, a dizzying high ahead. So thank you. You've been incredible. We've had a great time. I'm sure I
Thank
speak
you.
for everybody.
Thank you, Yumna. It's been wonderful speaking with you. And I know you've been sort of under the weather. So, it took a lot for you to do this, and I'm grateful. And I'm so grateful for being invited into this lovely little fold. I hope it proved worthwhile.
Absolutely.
I'm sure.
Absolutely, yes.
Everyone is going to come in and say that they really enjoyed it. So I can hear Shaji piping up as well. Thank you so much, Siddharth.
Thank you.
Entirely my pleasure. And I wish you all the best with your writing. And hopefully we'll meet at different points in time. And Rukmani, you and I will definitely meet.
We'll catch up.
And Yumna, this time we shall try and meet in Bangalore again if time allows. But to all of you, I'm so deeply grateful you could join. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rukmini, for setting this up. It's absolutely amazing as always. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Hello.
Bye.